Good morning, everybody. My name is Priya Guha, and I am a venture partner at Merriam Ventures here in the UK. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this discussion, which is a very important conversation about how London can be harnessed as a testbed, global testbed for innovation. And I'm absolutely delighted to have a fantastic panel with me to discuss that absolutely vital theme. So without further ado, let me introduce them. So I have with me Usha Raghavachari. Usha is the lab director for DFord. DFord is the global innovation startup lab focused on developing human-centered design inside the Ford Motor Company. And in that role, Usha has responsibility for labs based in London in the UK, Sao Paulo in Brazil, and also Melbourne in Australia. Welcome, Usha.
Thanks.
And then I also have with me Gursh Mandir. Gursh is the head of innovation and emerging products at Virgin Media's O2 Innovation and Emerging Products division. In that role, she is spearheading the company's move towards being a digital experience provider. So absolutely delighted to have you with us, Gursh, to share those experiences.
Yeah, delighted to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. And then last but very much not least, Rakesh Shah is with us. Some of you will know Rakesh because he is a key figure in the London tech scene. He is the head of commercial innovation for Transport for London. And in that role, Rakesh has not only set up the innovation lab for Transport for London, but has also in previous hats led on London's open data strategy, which has really transformed the London tech ecosystem. So welcome, Rakesh.
Thank you, Priya. Great to be here.
Wonderful. Well, let's kick straight into the conversation. The first question I wanted to discuss with all of the panelists was really around the role of innovation in large organizations. So maybe, Rakesh, I could kick off with asking you a question about actually what is the role that innovation plays in a large organization? How does that feel for you at Transport for London?
Yeah, thanks, Priya. So there's probably a couple of lenses here. I think the first one is it all revolves around emerging tech and the rate that it's emerging and the advances that it's creating. So in London, and if I think about when I was a child, the level of choice in terms of mobility was quite limited. You know, I'd either ride my BMX bike, I may use public transport, but I'd pay for it. In those days, there was no zip card. My parents may give me a lift. I may use a minicab or I may hail a taxi. Whereas if we just think about cycling now, you may own a bike, you may not own a bike. If you don't own a bike, it could be a dockless bike, it could be an e-scooter, it could be an e-bike, or it could be a wide range of other options. So we can see that the advances in technology just in the last few years has really enhanced new mobility business models coming into play. And my job working with my colleagues is how do we ensure we don't say yes to everything, nor do we say no to everything, but we start thinking about what impact it will have in London and for Londoners. And the second part of the role is large corporates traditionally try to make everything themselves. Or if they go out to the market, they'll prescribe exactly what they want. And what that does, it inhibits the innovation. So I think what we need to be much better at is setting clear problem statements, start thinking about the end user and how can we make the lives of Londoners better. And in my case, we have 31 million trips in London every day pre-pandemic. So that's a lot of customers to satisfy as they move around our city.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, fascinating. Usha, when we were chatting before the panel, you were telling me about the experience you've had running Dlabs as almost a startup within a big organization. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Priya, happy to. So DFord is relatively new inside Ford Motor Company. We're the company's human-centered design team. We have a whole bunch of labs all around the world. And our mission is super simple, actually. So really deeply understand the needs of the customers that we're trying to serve, whether they're commercial customers driving around in vans around London or car customers. So you and I. And then the second part of what we do is think about the emerging context, the future context into which we're going to design. So within the automotive space and the mobility space, quite often we're spending a lot of money, huge investments for things that we're going to be launching in 5-10 years time. And so a big part of our process is also understanding the future context. So firstly, understand the people that we're trying to serve, but then put them into that future context. And then we develop hundreds of ideas, we prototype and test them at pace, which causes some tension inside a business that's been around for 118 years and works at a certain speed. We have a different clock speed inside DFord, and yeah, we really use the customer and experts and pilots and testing in the real world to inform what we then proceed with and bring to market. So we take on some of the biggest challenges in the company and try and move in a super agile way to create brilliant new ideas, hopefully to transform the future of Ford so we're around for another 100 years. That's our small ambition. Yeah.
That's great, Usha, and I think I'm going to come back to you later to share some of those top tips of how you navigate those challenges. I think everyone will be interested in that. Gursh, if I may come to you, you were telling me before that actually one of the really interesting things about the corporate innovation game is just there are so many different balls you're having to juggle. So how do you see the wood for the trees? How do you decide what's the most important thing to prioritize?
There's so many ways to do this that I can't pinpoint one way to do it. But what I would say is, in general, create a playground or a free for all for people to contribute their ideas, because you don't know who's going to come up with the best ideas. I think that's the first point. The second point that I would raise is that I think it's really important to have an idea of what good looks like specifically for your organization and for the market that you're aiming for. And within that, have appropriate stage gates to qualify the top ideas with the right people involved in that qualification. So whether that's customers to qualify whether there's actually demand in the first place, senior team members to qualify kind of the impact and viability of the organization to execute a certain innovation or new idea, and then maybe product designers or developers or data analysts to really qualify those challenges that you might face in delivery and how to overcome them. And I think the final point that I would make is that because there are so many balls to juggle, don't forget about the great ideas that may have come up 2 or 3 months prior to what you're currently developing. So have a view of your pipeline, revisit it regularly, and don't be inflexible to taking ideas that have come up maybe a couple of months in the past, and because they may still be relevant, you don't know unless you test, which is exactly what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, that's such good advice. I wanted to turn to the theme of partnering. You know, I think we've all talked in the conversation so far about the importance of working with others to make things a success. And I think that's both external partners and then obviously partners within your own organization. But maybe I could come to you first on this, Usha, and maybe you could give us a sense of how do you partner or collaborate with external organizations to get the best out of the innovation environment you're working with? And maybe if you've got any examples to share, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, Priya, I'd love to. But maybe just to build on something that Gersh just said, I think it's super important, really important for us to get a real diversity of talent into the team to bring all those different perspectives. In the automotive industry, we have a lot of people who've kind of grown up in the industry and have a lot of car experience and vehicle experience. And what we're doing a lot of inside DFord right now is pulling in folks with services background and software and digital and data backgrounds, just to make sure we're creating the right conditions for a lot of those collisions to happen. So I just wanted to add that to what Gersh was saying. In terms of how we partner with external organizations for innovation, I would probably think of it in a number of different ways. So on one hand, we partner for inspiration. So we're a small team, relatively small team, and we can't have all the skill sets for every project and every problem and every challenge hired into the team. And so quite often we'll reach out quite often to very small organizations who have a particularly deep skill set in a certain area or experience, and we'll pull them in and work with them on a particular project. If you imagine the kind of transformation that Ford is going through, that many auto companies are going through, we're moving from this very kind of industrial hardware focused proposition to something that is hardware and software and services. And if you think about London, thinking about the ecosystem and the infrastructure context into which we're designing those, exactly, my head is hurting already, into which we're doing all of that. And so we're now leaning, I've got 200,000 people who are passionate about cars and know them inside and out. That now we're leaning into new spaces that we've never been in before. And so it's helpful to get that inspiration. We also work with startups. There's a number of startup initiatives that we sponsor as a company in particular areas of interest and focus for us as a business. We invite startups in and we work with them. We also do a lot of direct collaboration with customers. So we do a lot of pilots directly with customers. It could be large businesses like Sky, for example. We were talking about them earlier in a different context. They're one of our largest customers in the UK, and we do a lot of pilots with them. So customer collaboration and partnership is also important. On another scale, joint ventures. So we recently announced a partnership with ALD, Ford Fleet Management Services. So as I said, as we're thinking about services and other digital products, sometimes, you know, we make the strategic decision to partner with someone who has a lot of expertise already in that area. So lots and lots and lots of different courses depending on which problem we're trying to tackle. Yeah.
And that is sort of a realm of so many people external to the organisation, but I think we've also recognised how important it has to collaborate with your own colleagues, so people on the inside, and make that work. And maybe Gush, I can come back to you. As you've been setting up this, you know, really big transformation program and bringing in this innovation, how have you worked out the best way to collaborate internally with the colleagues you're working with on innovation and elsewhere?
Yeah, so for me, this is all about knowing who to bring in at which points of the innovation and testing journey. So I think firstly, letting people know that you are working with them for something exciting and futuristic is really important when there's change in an organization. So let them know that you're not stamping on their territory. The second part of that journey, I think, is really just opening that gate up to anyone who has got great ideas. You never know who they might be. And the final part of collaborating internally is actually a little bit outside of that. It's okay, maybe draw a line and acknowledge where you might need to go externally. And don't be afraid to do that if you're not getting results internally. So many people might think that collaboration with startups and other companies only really is relevant for the delivery and the build stage, but that doesn't necessarily need to be true. In my point of view, I think that it is very possible to collaborate across the innovation journey, not just internally but externally, to create, refine, and then deliver those new ideas. So I think an important point of the internal aspect is actually knowing where that boundary sits between internal and external.
Yeah, and keeping all of them engaged en route. That's a great piece of advice. Thanks, Gush. I wanted to come back to you, Rakesh, because I think one of the things that we all love about the City of London is the variety of players you have. You've got the public sector, you've got large corporate HQs, you've got universities, you've got not-for-profits. So how do you think about leveraging all of those different sort of cross-sector organizations as you're working on innovation?
Yeah, and you're right. You know, London's a fantastic place for those reasons. I think whether it's the academic world, whether it's the investment world, whether it's government or access to government or access to corporates, you know, we've got 9 million people. So there's incredible talent. So, you know, you start putting all of that together, it's a great test bed for innovation. And generally, when it's proven in London, quite often other cities take it on board and say, if it works in London, it's good enough for us. And I think for me, the focus is very much of what outcomes do we want as a city. And in my case, we've got a mayor's transport strategy that focuses on We want 80% of journeys to be made by walking, cycling, and public transport by 2041. So we've set out quite a long-term vision. And then we start thinking about the players within that. It's not just the traditional players. So it's not the new mobility players or the OEMs or others that mobility. We have lots of conversations with telcos, with retailers. We're a large property developer because of the land that we own. So we're starting to think about what does London look like beyond 2040? And how do we start achieving some of the goals that we've set out? So I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, we need to be clear on the vision that we have for our city and make sure other partners, whether they're a startup or a corporate, really understand what the direction of travel is for London. I think that's number one. I think the second bit is we're not always the procurer. Sometimes we can play that invisible hand by guiding people on what good looks like in our city. And I think the third thing is if people have got ideas, we need to think about the things that we need to think about as a responsible city. Is it safe? Does it support our air quality agenda? Is it secure? Is it accessible? Is it equitable? Etc. etc. So when new ideas come in, what we need to do is define the right problem statement, make sure we can influence the market and shape the market, let the market come up with ideas that hopefully addresses some of the goals and the parameters that we've set out. And as a result, do things better for London. And ultimately, as I say, we've got a strategic goal, which is 80% of trips by walking, cycling, public transit. But what we also want to do from my city hat on is do things better, cheaper and quicker, and fundamentally make life in London better for Londoners, but also people that are visiting London. And also we can't forget the carriers. You know, freight has a massive role in terms of getting goods in and out of our city.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it, isn't it? Bringing together the whole community under that bigger vision for change, as you're describing, and a bigger vision that benefits everybody in a city like London. You mentioned something in your remarks that I wanted to come back to you on, Usha, because you've mentioned this previously in the context of sort of why Dlabs decided to locate in London alongside Sao Paulo and Melbourne, as we were talking about earlier, which is the talent. So tell us about the role of talent that you found and how that's really essential for how you think about the innovation cycle.
Yeah, it's a great question, and actually it's our biggest strength and the biggest challenge that we have. The market is super hot right now, and guess what? Everyone's out looking for tech and data and digital and services talent. We're not the only ones, and so for us, I mean, London is super important, and the UK is super important at many levels for Ford and D-Ford. We run our global commercial business, so Transit, the lovely van that you see running around on the streets of London. I mean, we run it globally out of the UK, just outside London. So we have a huge installed base of commercial customers here in the UK, and so having access to them is really critical. But if you look at D-Ford and the talent that we're trying to draw into the business, that combination of tech and design talent, honestly, I couldn't think of a better place in the world to be than in London to get access to that talent. We have a lot of incredible academic organizations building that talent, growing that talent for us. We run a lot of internship programs. We're hiring like crazy. We're growing super fast right now in D-Ford. And I think if we were anywhere else, actually, even in the UK, I think we would struggle. One thing that the pandemic, though, has given us a lot of time to reflect on just the global nature of talent. And so whilst it's amazing to have all this fantastic talent on our doorstep, now our digital doorstep is pretty much the whole world, right? So you just have to kind of deal with time zones. But just working, I've become a lot closer to our other locations geographically during the pandemic, because digital is a wonderful equalizer, right? So everyone is in their little rectangle, and other than the time zone challenge, we now have access. We're running projects now asynchronously across different locations, where we can do a bunch of work and then hand off to the Melbourne team, who, as we're going to bed, they're just waking up. They take it on. And it's created, I would say, many organizations, not just Ford and D-Ford, but have gone through this incredible acceleration in their digital transformation efforts and we're just getting really good. We're getting good at collaboration digitally. We're getting good at prototyping digitally. We're really getting good at doing customer clinics. Who would have thought it? Digitally. And now I can run clinics. We used to bring people directly into the lab and have them stand around and look at our prototypes and give us feedback. Now we can push that out and have that running in multiple locations around the world when we do it digitally. So, thinking about talent locally and globally, I don't know that we've found the answer yet, but I think that's going to be a wonderful opportunity for tech and design talent as we think about how we fuel innovation in London going forward, how we access that talent more broadly.
Ghosh, I know you had some thoughts on this agenda as well.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at London as a city and considering the role that cities play in innovation, I mean, the environment that you're in really sets the context and the pretext for what you can make of your innovation strategy. So London has not just the talent available to drive innovation, but also high volume of investment pumped into new ideas to make it meaningful. But most importantly, the willingness, the energy, and the excitement to nurture those new ideas. What I mean by that is if you look at there's a really inspiring overlap between all the different players in the innovation ecosystem. If you consider who those are, so academics, startups, corporates, specific researchers and universities, there are several initiatives that you can see similar to what we've just been discussing in this conversation that really accelerate what we can do with innovation. So there are deep tech startup incubators which kind of join together academia and startups. There's startup divisions within corporates who accelerate corporate innovation ideas and pump tons of money behind ideas that may flop due to lack of investment. So I think London has this unique blend of initiatives that bring together those kind of the nexus of the ecosystem, what I would call the kind of where the overlap are in the key players that can really drive innovation forward. And for me, having run several innovation programs, that's where I've really felt the energy and the push forward of new ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the energy is very inspiring for everybody to really, reach for the skies. Rakesh, I know you wanted to come in on this as well.
Yeah, just a quick point. So I think it's around skills, and there's a concern here that there is a skill shortage, and we're all competing for the same talent within the city. So I think we need to think about this at a long-term level as well. And the Smart London Board's starting to do this, which is, what skills do we need in the future in our city? And it's not just in the UK, in London, it's across the UK. So we do need to get in really early in terms of syllabus and education, so we can start designing a process where the future software developer, data analyst, and others, there's an abundance of them to support our future sort of goals. I think the second point is that means that what we don't want to do is start competing for the same talent and not being able to afford delivery. So we need to partner more and more. And we're certainly now driving more corporate collaboration. We've done some work with Bosch, where we jointly looked at problem statements and put teams together to co-innovate and then develop innovative solutions. We're doing the same. We've done the same with Ford in some aspects. We've done the same with Daimler. And I think we should be doing more and more of that, because the danger is we could invest too much money and effort into proof of concepts, and as a result, not create as much value as we possibly could.
And maybe, Priya, if I could just add something that just Rakesh has triggered. I think we've gone, I would say, reflecting on our prior recruitment, not inside D4 necessarily, but as Ford and other large corporates, it tends to focus on certain academic institutions. We've done a lot of thinking more recently just to think about how we can be much more inclusive in terms of the talent that we're bringing in and nurturing talent from areas and parts of our society where perhaps we don't have strong representation today. I think that's also really important. And if I think about another thing that's incredible about London is just the huge diversity of talent. I mean, literally you have the whole world is in London. But if I reflect on who's coming through design schools and who's coming through you know, tech training programs, I don't see that same reflection of London in those programs quite often. So we've done a lot of thinking about how we could encourage that opportunity in some younger teenagers, actually, even before they start making choices. And we're just setting up a new initiative called Design Camp, where we're partnering with local schools just to encourage kids from perhaps different backgrounds to actually think about design and think about tech as a real career opportunity for them, which would fuel some of what Rakesh is talking about. But I think it's on us in large organizations and in the city to think about how we can create the right conditions for that.
Yeah, and absolutely, as you say, you know, innovation doesn't work if it's not inclusive. So we have to all, you know, have an obligation in how we think about innovation to really make that the core of our activity. Gorsh, I wanted to come back to you because, you know, you're spearheading this move for transforming Virgin Media O2 to be a digital experience provider, and in that role, you're having to think, I guess, about what's the right environment to test new ideas, to test new innovations, and then how you scale it. Tell us a little bit about how that's working out for you. What are the best sort of top tips you can share for us?
Yeah, day in, day out, that is like 60% of my job. Just thinking about, hey, am I doing this right? And to be honest, I figured out there's no right answer. You just have to go with a mix of what feels right and what people are telling you that you're doing well, and like, we really enjoy what you're bringing to the table, and we think that these ideas are meaningful. I think in terms of top tips in starting and building an innovation environment, I could go on for hours. Classic, I'm going to say my top three. The first one, I think, is being really honest when you come in and set up something like this. Be really honest on how mature the organization is in terms of innovation. And at which points do people need more guidance along the innovation journey? So being really realistic, really honest about that, and then kind of providing the necessary guidance on how to ideate, how to refine ideas, how to develop them into something that is meaningful that a designer or a data analyst can then go and work on. So I think that's the first one, being clear on the maturity of the organization and how to arrange and set up around that. The second one, I think, is keeping on testing and refining that internal innovation approach that you have. So not just looking at testing new products or testing with startups, but testing your own approach to innovation. That's been so key for me. As I said, I think I reflect more often than is normal about how I'm doing things, or whether this is going as well as it should be, or whether these are the right ideas to be pursuing. And the only real way to give yourself the confidence is to keep testing that and to keep thinking about that. I think the final point that I would make here is about the portfolio that you try to build. And I think we should take a really conscious and proactive approach to building a balanced innovation portfolio from the start. So thinking about safer bets that you might be taking in innovation, so those incremental improvements from where you are today, versus the more disruptive leaps towards entirely new markets, entirely new products, something that's really going to change the customer experience. And within that, kind of helping the people within your organization think about both safer and riskier bets, and defining that for them so that they can come up with real meaningful contributions along the process. When I was setting up this this innovation capability, one of the first things I did was really map out what those safer bets might look like in terms of the key technology and product themes, and what the riskier bets might look like. And this didn't prove just to be kind of inspiration towards people to get involved in innovation. It also meant that we had a really clear idea of what's coming up in the market, or what might be good to focus our efforts on. And while there's no clear answer, because you can't predict the future, it is a good it was a good exercise for us to have some kind of direction, so it doesn't feel like we're stabbing in the dark when it comes to when it comes to making those bets as to where to go in the future. And I think something that Usha said earlier was really interesting around understanding your current customer, but then trying to place them into the future. It's actually so much harder than it looks, because there are so many different possibilities about who those customers might be in the future. But you really get the answers from listening to them today. And asking some of those questions, even though they might be speculative, can still give you useful data points. So I know I've made more than 3 points there, but hopefully your value add.
They're super helpful. So thank you for sharing that. But I wanted now to switch from sort of talking about the theory of innovation and the experiences you've all shared to actually maybe asking for some real world examples. And if I may pick on you, Rakesh, and then Usha, to share one example of an innovation experience, and hopefully the sort of highs and the lows of that. Rakesh, maybe starting with you.
Yep. Oh, could I group a couple together?
Oh, go on.
So I think the one that stands out is the work we did around TfL's open data. So I think by releasing that data, we've got 17,000 developers that are developing products. Over 42% of Londoners use an app powered by TfL data, which means that if you're using Apple Maps, Google Maps, City Mapper, or something else, we've invested in the data. And ultimately, we're caring about what outcome do we want for a city. And what we want is to provide the right information at the right time, so you make the right journey that we want to drive. And in this case, using public transport or walking or cycling. So that was a game changer culturally within the organization, that startups can add real value around, because ultimately, sometimes you can look at startups if you've been in a company for 20, 30 years and say, well, I know what I'm doing. I've got my engineers. Why do I need to work with a startup? So that really helped sort of land some culture change. I think building on that, we started to think about, if we can do that with data, why can't that just be a way of working? So we launched a competition called London Road Lab. And that was very much around how do you reduce the adverse impact of roadworks in the city? And we collaborated with all the utilities. And what we did is we ran 9 proof of concepts in 10 weeks, and we paid for those. And just recently, we've announced 2 winners where we've signed contracts that are large value amounts, where we've scaled them. So we've applied a route to market right from the start to the end, which is now making a difference in London. And 2 products that were brought in, one was called Samdesk, which is scouts social media sentiment across the world, in our case, London. And what it tells us is about something adverse on our road network before we know about it, so we can deal with it. The second one is Immense, which is an AI engine. It ingests a whole load of data, and it tells us about the impact of roadworks before we carry them out. So it's really powerful stuff that we hadn't known about before. And the third area, very quickly, is Daimler. With Daimler, what we've done is there are lots of sensors within a car. And as a result, we're now using that data from the car to start mapping out road risk in London. So we can tackle sort of interventions or put in interventions before an incident has taken place. And what we're looking to do now, we've just put a call out on tfl.gov.uk/innovation, that if anyone else has any data, bring it in, and hopefully that helps us make London's roads even safer, because we need to get to Vision Zero, which is 0 deaths on London's road network.
Well, that's a great vision. We don't have a ton of time, but I'd love to hear an example from you, Usha, and maybe one from you as well, Gush, if you've got time. Usha.
I'll try and gallop then. So maybe just building on the last thing that Rakesh said. So we've just very recently launched a connected predictive maintenance service called Ford Live. And basically what this has come out of is a huge innovation project that we did with commercial customers and dealers. And we did a pilot for 16 weeks with dealers. And what the system does, it proactively monitors your vehicle and anticipates when you need service, because the biggest issue that commercial customers have is when their vehicles are off the road, and that impacts their ability to do the job, whether they're coming to do your plumbing or whatever service they're offering you as the end customer. And what was really interesting about the pilot that we did, we had a whole bunch of assumptions. We'd done all the work on the tech, and we knew how to read the sensors and get that insight and information back into the company. We found that the human factor was actually gigantic. The relationship between the customer and the dealer, the level of trust that was built, how we communicate the service that we're offering. And I always find this, every time we make something real and we're prototyping it and we get it out there, we go with a whole bunch of assumptions. and we learn a whole bunch of completely different things that are actually way more important. And so I guess my real example would be, unless you do it for real, and only until you do it for real, can you actually make it real. So
that's a great words of wisdom, Usha. Thank you. Gush, over to you.
Yeah, so I think, as you know, we're super early stage, a couple of months into designing a whole new innovation capability. So while I'd love to share as rich examples as Usha and Rakesh have, what I can tell you is that we are thinking of experimenting with potential emerging technologies that could really revolutionize not just telco, but other industries. Some of them that are particularly interesting to us are the role that augmented and virtual reality can play in elevating not just communications, but the whole digital experience that that any human being can experience. And this ranges right through from telco through to kind of communications and also travel. You guys are pretty experts in the mobility space, but you can imagine how augmented and virtual reality can transform not just the way we move, but where we move to, so holiday destinations and the like. So I will leave it to the imagination to think about what we could come up with. But there's lots of it's a very broad scope, and that's one of the fun things about being involved in innovation, is making those choices, because the possibilities are endless.
Absolutely. So I'm so sorry, we could have carried this on for hours, but I'm going to need to wrap this up and move on to our next panel. But in the meantime, I wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody, but ask you just to share maybe with the audience one final thing, which is, what is your one top tip for leading innovation effectively? Rakesh, I'm going to go to you first.
Right. So I would say challenge the status quo. Diversity of thought in organizations needed, otherwise they won't survive.
Love it. Usha.
Keep everyone with you on the journey. So I always say in D-Ford, we have 1 foot inside the company and 1 foot outside, and I need both my feet to stand and be successful.
Brilliant. Gush.
Be honest and refine based on what you're seeing.
Fantastic. Those are just fantastic insights. Thank you, Usha. Thank you, Gush. Thank you, Rakesh, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of London Tech Week.
Thank you.